Good day to you all. This is Matt Scott, still sitting here in my yurt, still talking about plugins that I use, carrying over the conversation from yesterday where we discussed 5 EQs and 5 compressor type plugins that I favor when I'm working from my yurt and don't have access to universal audio gear or regular internet access when plugins require it. So that's the setup for the episode today. What we're focusing on, as you've probably gathered from the title of the video, is things more in the realm of either modulation or, well, we'll say modulation, but not really. Delay and reverb is really the focal point. Am I going to be able to give you a top 5 with only 5 between reverb and delay? I'm not entirely convinced. We may talk about a few additional, but I'll try and keep it at least loosely concise as I am able for the purposes of providing you needed information. So we're going back into the same session we used yesterday. Not that you're going to hear any of it, but I'm going to use that as a template to build off from as we scope out plugins. And you're now looking at Pro Tools, which is the operating system I employ when I'm getting up in it. So today we're going to take a look at some of the reverbs and the delays that I have used in the past, come back to. And first and foremost, though, we'll hit the reverbs because I think that's going to be a quicker conversation. I'm going to start with the reverb that I use more than any other, even against any UAD plugins that I have, be it the new Hitsville reverb chambers or the EMT 250, or even the Reverb Pro, which is surprisingly kind of dope. Surprisingly, not surprisingly. I mean, there's money behind their products, you can tell. But anyway, ROM, Native Instruments. This little reverb can do everything you want and need. I am entirely convinced. And it does so in really brilliant ways while also being a non-conventional reverb. I mean, if you look at the face out of the gate, it's both everything you would expect, but also a little funky. So not only do you have the option to employ a reverb in one of 3 very particular styles. There's airy, there's cosmic, which is spacier and more modulated sounding, and there's grounded, which is more woodier and natural, room sound based. I use airy for almost everything. I find it has a quality of sound that does what I'm looking for without getting in the way. It's very, it adds presence. So even when I'm not looking for reverb and I set a quick decay in a mix and I trim out some lows, it just has a way of adding presence to a track without overwhelming you with a reverb sound that you'll listen back to once you've printed and be like, oh my God, there was way too much reverb. That happens less with ROM than other plugins, for me anyway. But as you can see, really flexible and assertive. So the ROM component has a pre-delay, which you can engage. When you do, you actually then have a feedback, which you can engage to, and you can get really loud, ring modulated, crazy effects. But I use it like you would any other reverb. I use it in place of a hall oftentimes, or a room reverb, or even a convolution reverb. It's really effective. CPU usage is low, so I can have a lot of instances going simultaneously. This is one I also got for free. I do believe it is my only Native Instruments plugin, but only because I got this for free. And again, I'm a cheapskate. I think if other NI options come up for, a discount through a coupon or otherwise, I'm definitely going to explore the space a bit more. And if you have suggestions for Native Instrument software that you think, kicks butt, let me know. I'm always looking for something to add to the arsenal. But this one has made me very happy, and I've used it consistently, I would say, for probably 2 years now. Almost every track I've produced, and it's got to be over 100 at this point in that time frame, has probably had a reverb, and that reverb very plausibly has been ROM in some fashion, if not on every track, maybe on a bus or a little salt and pepper on a vocal. So highly recommend ROM. They did phenomenal work with that plugin. I favor it heavily. Other things in reverb lands. I'm going to show you this one. This is kind of a funky dunk. This was a Pro Tools freebie. I pay for this Pro Tools Studio subscription service, and as kind of a fringe benefit when you log in every month or a couple months. They'll add a plugin that they have some sponsorship with that you can then add to your arsenal, and this was among them. And a pretty cool one. I mean, a convolution reverb you can add your own impulse responses to, but a lot of functionality and a lot of opportunity in here. So EMT 140, a bunch of Echoplex options, Bricasti options, some weirder stuff, spring amp style convolution reverbs. The goal with these is they really are supposed to articulately model a room, and that's a big perk if you're looking for, I don't know, organicism, I guess you could say. I've found their shorter plates to be really lovely. So when you go into, or plates, or even just sounds in general. So let's see if we can dial one in here real quick. So you go into the German 140s, you can get as low as a half a second decay time. A lot of the really short decay times I found very functional and very pretty, very lovely sounding. I've even used some of these on drum bus to good effect. I think the thing that really helps me out a lot as far as this thing goes is just the insane degree of control you have. But this window right here, you do have a extremely effective, albeit poorly designed EQ for trimming the fat and keeping the lows out of your reverb, etc., etc. I say that because if we're talking about dB, what you're going to notice here is that when I pull on these perimeters, we're looking at what, 700, 550. So if this is, I guess, this little amount of movement is what we would equate to like a 3 decibel boost. And with that 1/4 of an inch, we've now boosted by 24 decibels. Your margins there are very fine. So what you'll find as you're sculpting EQ for your reverb, you're only really doing like little tiny nudges. Anything too dramatic, I mean, that's 24 decibels. You're adding a lot of gain. Obviously, it's a good reason for having an output control on the tail end in your master section. But it does everything you want. Obviously, you can set it to half a second, and then you can add pre-delay. You can actually dial in that decay time with more precision. In this section here, your modulation, you can flip the phase on your modulation by 90 degrees. It's really flexible, and again, it was free, and it sounds pretty good. I don't use it on everything, but when I do, it's it's for a reason. If you're a Pro Tools user, absolutely log into Avid. Absolutely go to your subscription services and things that are afforded to you you haven't downloaded yet, and this is probably sitting in there. You won't use it all the time, but in terms of just having another sound to pick through, highly recommend it. It's dope. You also have a width control. Easy to be overkill with this. Why do you need a reverb that's wider than your whole stereo spectrum, like perception wise? You don't. You can do it. You can be at max, which is 200% width, but you probably won't keep it that way. I'll put it that way. But all things aside, Convolution XT, pretty cool as a freebie. I've definitely used it a lot out here in the sticks. Other reverbs, I'm going to give you, again, like I said, very hard just to do 5 for all delays and reverbs because I have more than that and I do use more than that. So this is just going to be really fast. Little plate, I do use this all the time, perhaps less so than some of my other plate reverbs just because I like the control of other reverbs. But if you just want to get an okay to possibly exactly what you need, plate reverb sound that takes you 2 seconds to set up, that's exactly what this does, and it does it really well. So you've got from infinite decay, which can take you into spaceship territory, all the way through really tight just because you want just a little extra something on the back end of your vocal or your snare drum. It's right there. You've got a low cut from 20 hertz to 1K. If you control click, and this is true of all of the Soundtoys plugins, low cut, as you can see, changes to an actual readout, so you can fine tune the hertz that you're going to be trimming at. And then a modulation, just a little something a little different. The sound transforms under the care of a little modulation before a plate reverb, and it gives you that functionality. It gets a lot of use, again, in part just because it's like if I need a reverb and I need a reverb, but I also don't want to spend time on a reverb. In 2 seconds, I can have that set up with something passable to come back to. And occasionally, from that point, it's just another quick adjustment. And oh, I actually will just keep a little plate on this bus. I really like the sound, or it's doing what it's supposed to. Moving on to other plate reverbs. This was another freebie maybe 2 years ago, received through Arturia. I really like what they're doing. Arturia plugins, I have a few now, but I find them to be very smooth, very useful, very creative, and kind of just a treat. So this plate reverb, as I said, if little plate is the shorthand, this is the longhand, and there is a lot of flexibility. So you actually have 3 different plate types: modern, EMT, and a punchy plate type. All of their decay times, kind of annoyingly, push up and down to set the length of your decay time. You have a drive, which is kind of fun when you're actually putting music through it and you crank the drive, you can see this little tube get hot. It does add more character, more saturation, more warmth, more depth, a little bit of distortion, more harmonics to your plate signal. It does sound good. It can be overkill, but the fact that they have a drive knob is pretty badass, and you'll definitely use it. Width, very wide, very pleasing to the ear. It's a very natural, stereo, cohesive width control. I would be more likely to put the width on this to full depth, as opposed to that convolution reverb, which could go to something like 200% and just like exaggerate in sometimes an unnatural way what you're trying to accomplish. But the 140 is a screamer. Also to be known that there is an advanced section, which would be, as they're showing it here, it's a rack unit underneath, but you might see these parameters even on the back of this if this were an actual reverb unit, where you have some EQ over the post-processing section, a modulation, a pre-delay, and then a high-pass filter. Again, things you could throw an EQ before this plugin to accomplish the same thing. But it's all inclusive, and they really are dimed out to sound good in each other's company and very musical. So I would strongly suggest checking out Arturia's product line in general, but the Rev Plate 140 gets a fair bit of use, and for good reason. It's pretty funky. This is one that I don't use all the time, and in part because I don't have the controller in my backpack, but I could. So there is a module included with this TC Electronic, the 8210, that lets you control from your desktop in the way that I was talking about that SSL having that option in the video yesterday when we were talking about EQs. So same concept, but this is a model of an 8210 classic reverb unit, and it just kicks butt. It's really great sounding. The parameters are super user-friendly. You have a lot of control over the color of the sound source in both low frequency range and more of the sweet spot range. Modulation values, obviously, I wouldn't call the design clunky, but it's designed to look like the hardware, right? So when you're using this, obviously, I can adjust and control any parameters I want to by pressing the virtual button. But if it was in front of me, I wouldn't even have to have this up. I would just be selecting the track and working the knobs, which all say the same thing, on the physical controller until I got to the same place. I'm guessing this product probably didn't sell super well. You can probably find them used and for cheap on Reverb for, I'm gonna guess $50. And for that and the option to get out of your headspace, I would say probably not a bad idea. And you can get other ones too. I think they have an EMT like 250 or something like that as well. I want to say there were like 2 or 3 different reverbs in their product line that they combined, and then you could actually rack them all together in this one little wooden rack and have all your TC electronic module, MIDI controlling modules ready to go. It's cool stuff. I enjoy it. I guess if I use the TC less than others, it's honestly just because the control really does add so much flexibility. But in the context of me being in a yurt off grid, with precious battery life, another USB thing charged into my computer is slowly sucking battery life out of that computer. So I'm losing productivity time by having it plugged in when I could just use a mouse. But the other thing, well, this is the new MacBook Pro, is a 2022, and it's all USB-C. There is no USB to anything. So you need a dongle just to attach a USB drive or a USB anything. In my case right now, I have an ILOK plugged into the one USB input on my dongle. So I can't even run that module unless I had another dongle and a way to convert to USB-C. Kind of crappy, but it is what it is. I wanted to show that to you regardless, though, because it is cool. I think it has a lot of functionality. So we'll leave that where it is with reverbs right now, and we'll jump over to some delays. I actually have fewer delays that I think I'm going to highlight right now, which is fine, in part because the first one I'm going to show you is so comprehensive and delicious. Again, it's a Sound Toys product that if you don't have it and you haven't used it, absolutely demo it. Go on the Sound Toys website, do what you need to do to get like a 30-day free trial, and take Echo Boy for a rip. It's an Echo processor, but it does delays phenomenally, beautifully, deliciously, sweetly, perfectly, and there's a million of them. When you're talking about delays and you're talking about echoes, they can really take the place of reverbs. And in a lot of cases, there are people who do say that, like, I don't really use reverbs in a mix. I just use delays because you can get to the same place with it. That's absolutely true, and then some with this. I mean, just look at how expansive it is. And again, you have all this control here with even more in the tweak section. But essentially, outside of echo times, which can be either note-based, triplet, dotted note, or time-based for getting into millisecond and second lengths, with a feedback, low cut, high cut, tap tempo. This is really convenient. I don't always have tracks where I'm printing a BPM, so it's not going to MIDI map, but the option to tap tempo to get to loosely the same place is really cool. These are more than a sleeper hit. These are like the equivalent I would describe as your attack and release times on a compressor, your groove and your feel knobs. So when you're trying to time align an echo or a delay or whatever to really link up sweetly with your track, sometimes it feels like you don't want it dead on. You want the delay to be a little rushed or have a different feel to kind of accentuate and or get out of the way of the fundamental thing that you are adding delay to. So in the feel section here, you can rush that delay or that echo. You can make that feel like it's dragging. And I mean, a little goes a long way. You'll hear it immediately. And then as far as grooving, you can go between shuffle. So swing versus shuffle, which has kind of the inverse feel. Both really applicable. You got modes: dual echo, ping pong, rhythm echo, single echo. I'll let you figure those out at your own behest, but you can kind of imagine what those do. Particularly with ping pong, it'll take your echo, your delay, and really send each subsequent reaction of that delay from one ear to the other in kind of a panning motion, and it sounds great. So the other thing that I would say makes this really badass, and obviously I just opened the style section, which is a whole Pandora's box of additional options here. But I would say the saturation knob is huge. You feel like you've got an echo or a delay sound and it's got some vibe to it, but it needs to be fattened up relative to your other sources, especially because you applied a pretty strong low cut so that it wasn't going to be reacting to the muddier content in whatever your sound source was. You can kind of make up that difference with saturation, make it woollier, make it rounder, just take up more space in your mix and kind of, whatever influence as you want the tonality of that end product. So Echo Boy, nuts. It does everything. I mean, just again, look at the options. Feedback options, sound design options, vocal effects, rhythmic, solo, drums, bass, guitar, reverbs and spaces, choruses and modulations, vocals, style tour, which just takes you kind of through a history of the different types of units it emulates. I usually start in style tour because this is basically going to give you the overview of all the different things it can do, and then you fine tune against the whatever 35 parameters you have here. Style Tour is also dope because this is how you can easily get to a more echoplex sound, space echo, you know, some of the things they're really modeling and trying to emulate in the end product. So all to say, Echo Boy for delay echo sounds, there's almost nothing better. It is so worth the money. Like, I would buy it again tomorrow if I lost it, because I use it almost every day. Next thing in this quick little tour, I think we're just going to do 3 delays for now. It's the J37. I bought this on a whim, mostly because I needed, or rather wanted, more of a tape saturation sound for a project I was working on. Tape speeds max out at 15 inches per second here, so you're going to hear the degradation, but it is a really sweet sounding tape emulation. With different tape formula options, you'll see it switch out here on the take back reel as we go through. Level in and out, by its very nature, when you boost your in, your out is going to be ducked inversely. And that's because if you want to push your signal really hot, you're obviously going to drive it into the red. So it will, within the same ratio, duck the output so that you're staying at the same output level, unless you tell it not to. You click this off and it's the wild, wild west. I mean, that's 18 dB a gain right there, 18 dB a gain, potentially 36 decibels of gain increase. So even your quietest sources will just be blistering massive pains in the ass to work with. But unless we get too caught up in what this is on the tape machine element, obviously you know that through the magic of folks like Les Paul, we learned a long time ago that your tape machine can also create a delay effect if you learn how to sync up your tapes in such a way. And that's exactly what this does. So it has a slap back, more of a feedback or feed forward delay, and then a ping pong. And it's really quite simple. Here's your delay level right here. You set your time here. You can sync to the music at your want and need. You can link or unlink your left and right. So if you want to have a more of a delay effect in your right ear than your left, or anywhere in between, you can do so. Cool that you can offset them from each other and then link and then move again. As you can see here, while my level in right is minus 30.5, my level in left was minus 17, and that ratio won't change as I move the two inversely against one another. So this gets a lot of use just when I need a different type of tape sound, often one that has a little more saturation, is a little woolier, has more of a vintage quality. Again, it's emulating something. I think this came from the Abbey Road series, so as you can imagine, something that the Beatles would have used. But it sounds really great. It sounds great on a bass guitar. It sounds great on a mix, as long as you don't run your mix too hot on input. A lot of flexibility, a lot of options. But if we're just doing the quick style tour thing for delays, so oddly enough, and I don't know why this is, when I go to multi-channel plugins and I go to delays, the next delay I'm going to show you doesn't actually show up as a delay. So I don't know if that's something with how it's configured through Pro Tools, or the way the handshaking takes place between Plugin Alliance. But this last thing I want to show you, let's see if I can find it here. Okay, pardon my brain space. You ever wake up on a Saturday morning and you're just like, I'm going to do everything today, or I'm going to do nothing today, or I'm going to do everything and I'm going to do nothing today? It's kind of one of those mornings for me. So apologies again if I feel like I'm off kilter, but I will come back into focus here momentarily. So the plugin I was going to tell you about is Comeback Kid. Comeback Kid, Baby Audio. Baby Audio is newer to the plugin game. Again, really prominence in the last couple of years with a rash of free plugins that started out in kind of like, let me tease you with the small hand version and then we'll bring it up. So I initially had this guy, which was Baby Comeback, which is the micro version of what Comeback can do. I never used Baby Comeback all that much. It didn't seem that useful relative, particularly to the Sound Toys delay and echo options that I had. But Comeback Kid, which is the full featured version, this thing is really stinking cool. It's extremely user-friendly, and it has a bunch of features that would really satisfy even the most anal retentive or just oddball musician. So you have a flavor section, an output section, a stereo section, and a shaper section. And every one of those, I mean, you turn it a little and you're like, oh shit, okay, like this makes a difference out of the gate. It's not like I have to take swirl and put it on 100 to tell that the flavor of a swirling delay is actually moving around the room. You start to get a sense of it as soon as you turn these knobs. And I really like that. Obviously, the likelihood of ever having any of these knobs at 100% probably isn't real high. At least in the nature of the mixing that I do, I find, I'm always carving out space so that I can make a more subtle modulation or time-based choice more effective. Very seldom am I maxing out an effect to make it stand out in a mix. But there could come a time and a place when you're working on something new and exciting and more inventive and imaginative, or even the sound design, and these would fit squarely in that bill. So real quick, the things you would expect: your time, your feedback. Feedback is a lot of fun. I actually I wish they had, like TC has, I wish Comeback Kid had a controller, because I know that feedback knob would be fucking huge and I would ride that thing, especially for automation. But the feedback, like, really, it'll feedback into perpetuity quite quickly. But it's very smooth sounding, made even more smooth by, I'm actually going to jump over to the output section because this is kind of, I think, the best of all worlds right here. So most importantly, you have a ducker. So you can set it so that your delayed signal, your echoed signal, will kind of stay out of the way of the fundamental sound that you are affecting. And it does it really intelligently and really smoothly. I'll often keep my ducker as much as at 30 out of 100, just by default. I find it makes plenty of room for what I'm trying to delay still poke through, but having all that energy behind it and spatialization. Wet, dry. I'll often keep wet, probably like 50%. Again, heavier handed on having your signal of origin over the end result, which is a wet signal. And this is all based under, as I'm saying this is all based under the assumption that I'm using something like this directly on an insert. I'm not creating a bus. If it was on a bus, I'm probably more inclined to leave it wet, and then I adjust my overall wetness from against the original signal by just bringing down the master fader on that effect send. But all to say, this thing is really excellent. Flavor, cheap. It's like a degradation. It's like, the trend of making everything lo-fi. That's your instant delay lo-fi. You can add more kind of tape saturation, harmonics, gluey compression to your delay, swirl, and then sauce. I actually don't even know what sauce does. I'm sure it's something and it sounds good, but it's called sauce. If they wanted you to know what it was doing in like mathematical engineering terms, they wouldn't call it sauce, because I'm sure there's an actual name for it. But the sauce is good. It's like a Tabasco. I put Tabasco on everything. Point taken. Shaper, low cut, high cut, attack and sustain. Really cool. The attack in particular. How quickly does that delay pop in at the time that it received the signal? And the option to make it almost more like a pre-delay, or to really kind of slow it up. And then the sustain, not to be confused with feedback, because feedback is that oscillation. Sustain is how long does that delay draw out. The shaper, huge. Like, such simple tools, but really functional, and allow you to get a lot of functionality out of what is a pretty simple package. And then last but not least, stereo. As if we needed another option, you can make your delay mono, even if it's in stereo, with a click of a button. Pretty helpful if your delay is now taking up too much room and you want to thin things out. You can pan your delay so that it'll actually sit in one side harder than the other. Richer, who knows, it's a fattener, widener, and then an actual widener. And the spatialization with this wider knob is actually huge. They did a great job with it. So I believe those are the 3 delays that I wanted to show you. for the time being. And again, when we get into UAD plugins, there'll be lots more to look at. But this gives you a good primer of kind of what my arsenal is and what I go through and favor when I'm yerking in the yurt and want to just keep the laptop unfettered. So that's it for now with this abrupt episode of plugins Matt uses while he's living in the woods, oftentimes by himself, because his beautiful wife is at work making the dough. I'm going to stop the share. Remind you that every day is a new day. Every day is an opportunity to make something better than it was before. Every day is a chance to improve yourself. I'm improving myself today by making videos like this, by having a cup of coffee, by taking the time to talk to some people I don't talk to that often, by working on some mixing, probably by getting outside and enjoying this very kind of bitter, cold January day, and by keeping my dog fed and watered. That's what I'm doing. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it's more than nothing. And in this era, more than nothing is more than nothing. All right, I'll be back soon. Next edition, I think we'll probably get into any of a number of subjects, probably saturation, harmonics plugins. I have a bunch of those I use. And then kind of, as I said, the a la carte things that don't fit perfectly in a box, but get use, and some that are more utilitarian and like task oriented versus creative. Be well. God bless. We'll talk soon. And keep mixing.